Winter came early to Evermere that year. By the 1st of December, the maples had long since shed their color, and the town looked as though it had been tucked beneath a quilt of snow. The air smelled of wood smoke and bread, and the only sounds were the low hum of the coal yard and the laughter that carried from one porch to the next. They still call it the winter we remember, not because of what we lost, but because of what we found. A way to keep each other warm when the cold tried its best to take us apart. This is the story of that season, told by the people who lived it. You'll hear their voices, their hopes, their small miracles, stitched together like patches in a blanket. And maybe, by the end, you'll understand why Evermere still glows a little brighter whenever the snow begins to fall. So pull up a chair, pour something warm, and listen close. It starts, as it always does here, with a single light in a window.
They called it the long winter, the kind that buried fences, froze the river into a sheet of glass, and made the whole town of Evermere breathe in little white clouds. That was the winter I learned that light can be small and still be enough. My name is Margaret. I live near the top of Maple Hill, where the drifts press against the pickets like sleeping sheep. Most evenings I boil water for tea and turn down the lamps early to save kerosene. But on the first night of December 1956, I did something I hadn't done since my husband worked the coal seams beyond the tree line. I set a lantern in the window. It wasn't much of a thing, a dented brass frame, the glass clouded by years of breath and stove smoke. But when I struck the match and turned the wick, the flame stood up straight as if it remembered its old job. Warm gold slid across the kitchen table, over the mended tablecloth, touched the photograph of him in his work jacket, and settled in the glass like a promise. I told myself it was for me, for company. Back when the mind swallowed him before dawn and returned him at dusk, I kept that lantern lit so he could find the shape of home, even on nights the sky forgot the moon. There are some habits you put away, like a winter coat, and there are others you fold and unfold until they feel like prayer in your hands. The first week I didn't think anyone noticed. Evermere hunkers down when the weather turns. Folks walk quick with their chins and their scarves. But on a Tuesday, Mrs. Carter from across the way paused in the snow and lifted her mitten to the window. She smiled, small, like someone remembering a song. The next night her living room answered me, a soft square of amber behind her curtains. By Saturday, the Thompsons 3 doors down had one too, and then the little bungalow by the bend, the one with the squeaky gate, glowed like a buttercup under frost. Street by street, window by window, the hill began to gather stars of its own making. I would sit by the radiator and watch them appear, one by one, as if the night was learning our names. On the coldest night, so cold the clothesline rang like a wire when the wind plucked it, the mine siren failed. A drift had eaten its sound or the lines froze. No one was sure. We waited, not knowing if the shift would come home on time or at all. I trimmed the wick and turned the lantern higher until the glass bloomed with light. Footsteps began to gather on the hill, not hurried, just the tired rhythm of men who had met the earth and made their way back through it. When they reached Maple Lane, someone called out, not loud, almost to himself. Look, the town waited for us. Some did not return that winter. Evermere knows how to set an extra place on the table, how to bring casseroles in tin foil and speak softly on porches and stand shoulder to shoulder in pews without asking for words. In those weeks, the lanterns did the talking. They said, here is warmth, here is the way in. When the thaw finally came, the hill let go of its white silence. The gutters sang, the maples dripped, the road reappeared in patches like an old quilt. Neighbors took down their lights one by one, wiped the glass, boxed them for next year. I cleaned mine too, then set it back in the window at dusk, out of habit more than need. People ask me, even now, why I keep it there. My husband has long since gone to the gentler seam beyond all seams. No shift whistle tells me when to lay supper on, but I have learned that hope is a small, stubborn flame. It doesn't demand the night to end, it just asks for a little air. And so when winter comes to Evermere and the hill forgets its color, I strike a match and lift the glass. Through the frost I can see the Carters' glow return, then the Thompsons, then the Buttercup bungalow at the bend, a string of quiet stars waiting to be counted. If you pass our way some evening and the wind leans hard against your coat, look up the slope toward Maple Lane. You'll know my window by the steady light. It will not chase the darkness off the hill, but it will make you certain of where the door is. And sometimes, some winters, that is the very miracle we are given.
They say you can tell the soul of a town by how it smells in December. In Evermere, it's butter, cinnamon, and coffee. Those are the smells that live in the cracks of my bakery, clinging to the bricks no matter how cold the wind gets. I've been baking here on Main Street for 33 years. My hands know the weight of dough better than they know a handshake. Some mornings I still wake up before the whistle from the coal yard because the ovens don't care what time it is. They care that you show up. Back in the winter of '56, business was slow. People came for bread and the occasional dozen rolls, but fancy sweets didn't make sense when every dollar had a job to do. Still, I made my pies. Every night before closing, I'd bake one extra, small, nothing special, and wrap it in brown paper tied with a bit of string. I'd carry it under my arm on the walk home. Some nights I left it on a neighbor's porch. Sometimes it went to the church steps. Once, I set it on the bench outside the bus station, still warm enough to fog the paper. I never left a note. Didn't need to. Kindness speaks fine without ink. The first year, I never knew if anyone found them. The snow always covered the footprints by morning. But the following Christmas Eve, just as I was sweeping up flour, the bell over the bakery door jingled. A man and his little girl stood there, both with cheeks red from the cold. He held a tin pie plate in his hands, empty, and said, "You don't know me, sir, but last year you fed us." He placed a small bag of flour on the counter. Said it wasn't much, but he wanted me to have it. The girl smiled the way children do when they've seen something good happen and want to remember it. They left before I could say thank you, and after that I never stopped. Every Christmas, another pie, another porch, another small light against the dark. It became a kind of secret season, my own advent. By the third year, other folks in Evermere had started doing it too. Loaves of bread, knitted scarves, a box of oranges left at the widow's door. It caught like fire, only gentler. When I finally closed the bakery, I kept the rolling pin. It's cracked now, smooth from years of work, but I still use it each December. One pie, always one. It doesn't matter who finds it. What matters is that someone does. There's a quiet magic in giving without the sound of your own name attached. The world's noisy enough with everyone trying to be seen. Sometimes the best gifts are the ones that walk away in someone else's hands while the giver stays in the shadows, smiling into the cold. I suppose that's what Evermere taught me. That generosity doesn't need an audience, just intention. So every Christmas Eve, when the last carol fades and the street's empty, I light the bakery oven one more time. The dough rises slow, the apples soften in sugar and spice, and the smell creeps through the alley like memory itself. And when the clock above the counter strikes midnight, I wrap that single pie in brown paper and set it by the door. Someone will find it come morning. Maybe a tired man on his way to work, maybe a stranger just passing through. Whoever it is, I hope they taste more than apples. I hope they taste the quiet kindness that keeps this town warm long after the snow has settled.
When you're 12, the world feels enormous, especially in winter. Every sound is swallowed by snow, and even the church bell sounds like it's ringing under a blanket. That was the year my father went away for work. He said he'd be back before the thaw. I believed him, because fathers always come back when you're young. But weeks passed, and the snow didn't stop. Our house sat at the end of Maple Lane, right on the edge of the woods where the wind never got tired. Mom took in mending to keep the heat on. I mostly watched the window and counted the flakes that clung to the glass. One afternoon, when I couldn't stand the quiet anymore, I went poking around the shed and found a metal box half buried under an old blanket. It was dented and dusty, with a cracked glass dial that said Hallicrafters S38, shortwave receiver. I didn't know what that meant, but I knew it looked like possibility. I brought it inside, wiped it down, and started turning knobs. Nothing, so I scavenged batteries from the flashlight, twisted wires, and hoped for a spark. When static finally burst from the speaker, I nearly jumped out of my chair. It was the loudest thing in the house. That's when I started calling it my snow radio. Most nights I'd sit beside it, listening to the hiss and crackle, pretending it was the sound of faraway places breathing through the storm. Sometimes I thought I heard voices, not clear words, just shapes of sound, a laugh, a phrase, a low hum that felt familiar. I liked to imagine it was my father, sending pieces of his voice home on the wind. Mom said it was nonsense, but she'd sit near the lamp while I tuned the dial, pretending to read. Once, she even whispered, "If you hear him, tell him we're fine." Then came Christmas Eve. The power flickered. The snow was heavy as a secret. I sat cross-legged beside the radio, careful with the dial, when suddenly the static sharpened, just for a heartbeat, and a voice pushed through. "Maple Lane," it said, then softer, "Keep the light on." And then it was gone. I don't know if it was real or if I built it out of hope, but that night I lit the lantern in the window, the same one Mrs. Carter kept across the street, and for the first time all winter, the cold didn't feel so mean. Dad came home in February, thinner and quieter, carrying a box just like mine. He said, "Couldn't pick up much on this thing, but sometimes I swore I heard you." We sat side by side at the table that night, 2 radios between us, both a little crackly around the edges. I still have that radio. It sits on my desk, silent now. But sometimes, when the snow piles high and the house hums with memory, I turn the dial just to hear the static breathe. It reminds me that even in the quietest winters, something or someone is always trying to reach us.
You can learn a lot about a town from its mail. Who's waiting on who? Who still says sorry the old-fashioned way? Who sends a check and who sends a prayer? I've been carrying both kinds up and down Evermere's streets for near on 30 years. When you've walked that long in every season, you start to know the rhythm of doorsteps. You know which houses smell like coffee at dawn, which porches creak before the kettle whistles, and which dogs have decided you're a part of the route. My name's Walter Davis. Folks around here just call me Mr. D. I've been delivering letters since I was 24 and had more hair and less sense. Now I'm 58 and I've learned that envelopes are just mirrors. You hold one up and you see a piece of somebody's life. This particular winter, 56, the long one, nearly swallowed my root whole. The snow came early and mean. It blew across the lanes until the world looked erased. But the post doesn't wait for spring. I wrapped my scarf twice and told myself, if these folks can wait on good news, the least I can do is bring it to them. The first delivery of December was to Mrs. Carter on Maple Hill. A letter from her son stationed overseas, paper thin, folded careful, smelling faintly of tobacco. She met me at the gate before I could knock, mittens already dusted white. "Morning, Walter," she said, and I saw she'd been crying. There's a kind of gratitude that doesn't need words. She had that kind. Farther down, I stopped at Margaret's house, the widow with the lantern in her window. She'd started leaving it lit again that winter, and it helped me find her walkway when the snow hid everything else. No letters that day, but I left a Christmas card from the church. She waved through the glass and went back to her tea. The light behind her flickered like memory itself. At the bend stood Harold's Bakery. Most mornings the door was propped open just enough to let the smell of cinnamon and coffee drift into the street. He'd have a letter or two from suppliers, and I'd trade him news of the weather for a piece of whatever hadn't sold. That winter, he started sending parcels around town. No return address, just brown paper and string. I carried each one and kept my mouth shut, but between you and me, I knew what was inside. Kindness doesn't weigh much, but you feel it in your arms all the same. Elm Street was the hardest leg of the route. The wind knifed between the houses there, and half the mailboxes leaned like old men too stubborn to fall. One afternoon I came across a letter with no stamp, no address, just the words, "For anyone who needs it." It was sealed neat, handwriting steady. I should have taken it back to the office, but something told me to leave it be. So I slid it into the first mailbox on the row, a blue one with rust creeping up the hinge. 2 days later, Mrs. Green stopped me on her porch, waving that same envelope. "Mr. Davis, did you see who left this?" she asked. Inside was a single line, "You are not forgotten." She said she'd been sick, hadn't seen anyone for weeks. I told her the truth, that sometimes letters know where they belong before we do. She cried, then made me tea that tasted like forgiveness. You keep enough winters behind you, and the roots start to feel like a story you're still walking through. By Christmas week, the whole town had lanterns burning, pies cooling, and children laughing at the pond. The kind of warmth that makes a postman forget how cold his boots are. On Christmas Eve, I finished the route just as the last light went pink over the snow. I stood at the top of the hill and looked down at Evermere, windows glowing, smoke curling into the sky, the sound of bells spilling from the church. That's when I realized something. We spend our lives carrying each other's words, even when we don't mean to. A letter, a pie, a wave through frosted glass, it's all the same message, really. Every year since, when the snow starts falling, I walk my old route again. No bag, no uniform, just habit. Sometimes I find a card tucked in a fence post or a loaf on a doorstep. And sometimes, if I'm lucky, I catch a glimpse of Margaret's lantern at the top of the hill. Still burning, still showing the way home.
There are two kinds of warmth in this world, the kind you get from fire and the kind you get from people. I've spent most of my life chasing both with a needle and thread. My name is Grace Miller, and I keep a small sewing shop on the corner of Willow and 3rd, right across from the old post office. The bell above the door rings even when nobody's there, because the draft likes to let itself in. Most days I mend trousers, patch sleeves, and shorten hems for folks who promise to pay when the snow melts. They always do. Evermere may not be rich, but it's honest. That winter of '56, the cold came hard and early. The coal trucks couldn't make it through the drifts some days, and folks started burning whatever they could find. I learned quick that warmth isn't only made of heat, it's also made of care. So I started sewing blankets. Not fancy quilts, just scraps of flannel and wool stitched together with the strongest thread I had. At first it was just one blanket, made from old coats someone left at the church. I gave it to the Thompsons after their furnace quit. The next week, the widowed schoolteacher came in, and I gave her one too. Before long, I was working from dawn till lamplight, the floor buried under fabric, the air thick with the smell of wool and candle wax. Some nights I'd hear the whistle from the coal yard and think about my husband, Daniel. He'd been gone almost 10 years, but that sound still caught me. He was the one who taught me to sew straight lines, said even a simple stitch could hold the world together if you believed in it enough. I think about that when the thread breaks mid-seam. I tie a knot, start again, and somehow it holds. Around Christmas, I got a letter from Mr. Davis, the postman. He said he'd seen my blankets showing up all over town and wanted to help. So every morning, he'd stop by before his route, take 2 or 3 folded on his arm, and leave them wherever they were needed most. He never said where, and I never asked. It felt better not knowing. One evening, as I was closing shop, I heard a knock on the door. It was little Tommy from Maple Lane, the boy with the shortwave radio. He held out a small parcel wrapped in newspaper and string. Inside was a scarf, crooked and uneven, clearly sewn by new hands. "Mom said you make things for people," he told me, "so I tried to make something for you." I didn't trust myself to speak. I just nodded and said, "It's perfect." I still wear it when the wind cuts sharp. Word must have traveled, because soon the whole town seemed to be sewing. Old Mrs. Green was stitching in her parlor again. Arthur the baker used his twine for tying more than bread. Even the teenagers started cutting up old flannels for squares, Evermere became a patchwork, each home a piece of someone else's kindness. I like to think Daniel would have smiled at that. By the time the thaw came, I'd made 53 blankets. Some were rough, some lopsided, but everyone had a story folded into it. A mother's worry, a child's laugh, a neighbor's gratitude. The kind of warmth that lingers even after the cold lets go. Now, years later, I still keep one blanket in the front window of the shop. It's faded, edges frayed, corners gone soft. But sometimes people stop and look at it like it's something more than fabric. Maybe it is. Maybe it's proof that comfort doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be offered. And every first snowfall, I light the lamp by the window, thread a needle, and start another one. Because there's always someone out there fighting the cold, and sometimes the only way to help is to put a bit of yourself into the thing that keeps them warm. That's the secret no one tells you about sewing. You can't make a blanket without giving away a piece of your heart. But if you're lucky, that heart keeps more than one person warm.
If you ask anyone in Evermere where winter truly begins, they'll point you toward Miller's Pond. It sits at the far edge of town, surrounded by maples and cattails that lean low when the snow piles up. Every year, when the ice grows thick enough, someone tests it with a stone, then a boot, then a laugh that carries across the valley like a promise. I was 16 that winter, the long one, the one they still talk about. The cold came early, and school let out more often than not. Most kids stayed inside with Coco and comic books, but not me. The pond called like it always did, quiet but insistent, a frozen heartbeat under the trees. The first day I stepped onto it, the sky was so clear it hurt to look at. My breath rose like smoke, and the sound of my skates on the ice echoed as if the world were listening. I wasn't the only one. By Christmas week, half the town had shown up. Arthur from the bakery brought a basket of rolls wrapped in cloth to keep them warm. Mr. Davis leaned against the fence, laughing with the Thompsons. Even Margaret from Maple Hill came down, her lantern glowing softly in her mittened hand. For a moment, all of Evermere was standing on that pond, shining beneath the same sky. There was a boy named James, who skated faster than anyone I'd ever seen. He had a red scarf that trailed behind him like a streak of courage. He'd race from one end to the other, then slide to a stop in front of me, spraying snow over my boots. "Come on," he'd say. "You can't feel winter if you don't chase it." And somehow, every time, I'd try, laughing, falling, then laughing harder. It wasn't love. Not then. It was something gentler, like knowing someone else was keeping time with your heartbeat. When the band from the high school showed up on New Year's Eve, James pulled me out to the middle, and we danced on our skates while everyone clapped to keep warm. The lanterns around the pond shimmered on the ice, reflections of stars we could almost touch. That night, snow began to fall, light as breath. We all stayed too long, our cheeks red, our fingers numb, but no one cared. For once, nobody talked about the cold or the bills or the long dark months ahead. We just moved together, an entire town gliding in slow circles, reminding the night that we still had music left. The next morning, the paper said the temperature had dropped to the lowest on record, the kind of cold that makes glass sing in its frames. But if you asked me, that was the warmest night Evermere ever saw. Years have gone by since then. The pond still freezes, though not quite as smooth as it used to. Most of the faces have changed. Arthur's bakery belongs to someone new. Margaret's lantern sits in the church window now, where it still burns every Christmas Eve. And every year, when the snow begins to fall, I drive out to Miller's Pond and watch the kids test the ice the way we used to. Stone, boot, laugh. Sometimes I lace up my old skates and step onto the ice just for a few minutes. The wind still bites, the stars still shimmer, and if I close my eyes, I swear I can hear James laughing, somewhere just ahead, calling me to chase the cold again. I do, of course, because some things you don't outgrow. You just carry them with you, folded into the years like warmth in a pocket. And when I leave, I turn back once before heading home, watching the light from the lanterns ripple across the frozen water. They look like a constellation that belongs only to us, to Evermere. To the winter we remembered together.
Spring always comes slow to Evermere. The snow lingers in the shadows, the pond cracks open one whisper at a time, and the lanterns in the windows burn a little longer before giving way to daylight. By then, the town has changed in small ways you almost miss. A new coat of paint on the bakery door, a fresh stack of mail in the postman's satchel, a folded blanket waiting on a church pew, left there by hands that no one saw. Life doesn't end when winter does. It just finds a different rhythm. Sometimes, when the wind carries the last scent of smoke through town, I think back to that season. To the pies, the letters, the laughter on the ice. To the light that passed from window to window, refusing to go out. The truth is, warmth isn't something you keep. It's something you give away until it circles back to you. And every time the snow begins to melt, Evermere remembers that lesson all over again. Because in this town, hope doesn't leave when the cold does. It lingers, soft as sunlight on the thawing river, and waits for the next winter, the next story, the next light in the window.